Now that I talked about Lyney in yesterday's video, it's time for me to talk about the other twin, Lynette. Many of the people that were hyped for this duo to begin with expected them to be a single unit because of how they were presented in the story trailer MiHoYo released a long time ago. While that sadly didn't happen, from what I've seen, people want to understand how good they are together regardless. In this video I will be going over Lynette's kit briefly, and then I'll tackle how she synergizes with Lyney and other possible teams. Lynette has a typical Anemo off-field damage dealer kit, as her damage profile looks quite similar to Kazuha and Sucrose. She has an elemental skill that deals damage in a single instance, and an elemental burst that deals continuous damage. Moreover, she has a team buffing passive, although her buffing capabilities look considerably lower than the characters I mentioned before, as hers increases attack for the whole group based on how many different elements are on the team when she uses her burst. By default, this looks anti-synergetic if we're thinking at possible pairing between her and Lyney, since the latter specifically benefits damage buffs-wise depending on how many Pyro characters are on the team, which means that on a Lyney team, Lynette would provide just a 12% attack buff to the whole team as opposed to the potential full 20%. Still, again, the buff is not that relevant, and the difference is not big, so it's not a deciding factor at all. The rest of her kit is rather straightforward. Her elemental skill has a press version which allows it to deal damage instantly, or a hold mode which makes Lynette run through enemies like Yelan's elemental skill, and then deal the skill damage to all the enemies she marked that way. This skill has a 12 seconds cooldown, but her Constellation 4 gives her a second charge of it, meaning she should be able to use it twice per rotation. Moreover, the Constellation 1 gives it a grouping property, since it will make the skill create a vortex after activation, although the potency of the vortex is not known as of now. The elemental burst makes her cast an object on field which taunts surrounding enemies, and deals 11 instances of Anemo damage AoE. At the same time, the object will absorb an element if there is any applied on enemies during its duration, and deal elemental damage of that type as well. Her Constellation 2 will double the instances of damage dealt through the absorbed element. Something that jumped out from my initial calculation is that the raw damage multipliers are actually quite decent. In fact, she is similar to Kazuha in that regard, which is great because Kazuha has always been the best Anemo off-field raw damage dealer. Not only this means that she should perform greatly when built with raw damage buffing stats on a team with proper buffs for her, like Farazan and Bennett, but it also makes her potential with a build like that interesting in general. On the Mono Pyro Lyney team, where she gets just the Bennett buffs, assuming she's holding an energy recharge weapon, she should deal better damage than her elemental mastery counterpart unless there are big groups of enemies around. It's definitely not something you should stress about, as Lynette is not a big damage contributor on the team, but if you have a nice crate with a decent vanilla build sitting around in your box, giving it to her wouldn't be a bad idea on most teams. And on Farazan teams, her damage profile looks good enough for her to be really promising. Also because her Constellation 6 gives her Anemo infusion on auto attacks for 6 seconds after she uses her elemental skill, so maybe there is potential for some kind of quick swap mono Anemo playstyle, where she can stay on field for a couple seconds and do nice on-field damage. Talking about the Lyney synergy more, she's more or less competing with Kazuha on his teams, which is no easy task. Surprisingly, however, it's closer than you might expect. The reason is that Lyney is a character that gets a lot of damage buffs just by existing, as his passive will give him 100% damage bonus on the team. To a lesser extent, Ling also gets plenty of buffs by default, thanks to the Emblem of Severed Fate burst damage buffs, and some weapons like the Catch or Wavebreaker's Feign, which also give buffs of that kind. The result is that you don't lose much team damage by swapping out Kazuha for Lynette. Also because, since I said earlier, their damage profiles are similar. Still, Kazuha provides invaluable utility through elemental skill grouping on a wide range, something I don't think Lynette will be able to match. On the other hand, Lynette's burst generates a taunt. Yesterday I talked about how Lyney might need a shielder to avoid getting interrupted during his rotation, in the scenario where his own taunts proved to be ineffective. That scenario is quite grim, since the shielders available in the game would result in a big damage loss compared to standard Mono Pyro. So, if if Lynette's taunt can help making Lyney evasive while on field, she might prove to be a very valuable addition to his team, even with Kazuha in mind. I'm done for today. As always, these are very early considerations, and are highly subjected to change, but as of right now I'd consider Lynette to be quite promising. There is still a lot for me to cover regarding the next patch, so stay tuned, as I'll be back for more.